Hi, this is Carl with another super success video for managed service providers. Today I want to talk about building a culture of joint responsibility. Okay, that's a big phrase. What does that mean? Well, first of all, you know what culture is, although we're going to come back to that. There's two primary kinds of responsibility that we find in business, especially when you've got employees. The first kind is shared responsibility. And I want you to write this down because it's very important and most people haven't figured this out. When you have shared responsibility, no one is responsible. Here's what I mean. When you have shared responsibility, let's say, for example, that you're on a committee and everybody knows that somebody is going to volunteer, and so you don't have to. And so even though you've taken on the responsibility to be on a committee to do a certain amount of work, you can always opt out because somebody else is going to step up. Well, in the workplace, what that means is, for example, if you delegate something to an employee, but then you check every piece of their work, why do they need to do a quality job? Because they know that you got their back. You are the net that will catch them if they fall. And so they're not motivated, they are often not motivated to do a great job because they don't need to. Now, obviously, the downside of that kind of shared responsibility is that you actually end up doing almost as much work as if you hadn't had an employee. This is always the owner's fault. When you create any kind of processes where there is a shared responsibility, you give people permission to opt out. A really great example of this that I have seen and had to create policies around squishing it down is technicians. Every once in a while you'll get a lazy technician who opens a ticket, looks around and says, oh, no, I don't want to do that. Now they've wasted enough time. They put a note in the ticket, they close it. They might even add some time to that ticket, but they didn't do any work. Not only did they not work on that ticket, they weren't working on another ticket. And they do that again and again and again, sort of fishing around for the tickets that they want to take. In a perfect world, you should have a system where your technicians are competent, capable, and conscientious, and they are able to govern themselves. That means you got to work from highest to lowest priority, and you make sure that people take on tickets that they can actually handle. They don't take tickets that are too difficult for themselves, or take up all the super easy tickets and not leave those for anybody else. Now that balance requires that you trust them and you train them and that you have a culture of being conscientious about how you work through the system. But it also means that you don't have a system that allows people to get away with picking the tickets that they want, even though they could do a lot of these jobs. They only do the ones that they actually like. And the reason that this goes sideways is that bosses don't know how to solve that problem. They don't know how to keep people from being irresponsible on their job. Put a pin in that, we'll come back to that. Now, what do we mean by joint responsibility? So shared responsibility, kind of everybody's responsible, but no one is responsible. With joint responsibility, everyone is responsible. How does that work? Think about a loan. If you co-sign for a loan for my car, guess what? If I don't make a payment, you do. People who co-sign on a loan are both responsible for the loan. And that's what joint responsibility is all about. When you have a team that is jointly responsible for providing excellent service to your clients, everyone is responsible. And part of what happens is that they then have to keep each other in line, keep each other responsible, make sure that they govern themselves so that the owner and the manager don't have to do it for them. So if you want a culture in which You don't have to overmanage your team. You need to create processes and procedures so your team can essentially manage themselves. When they take joint responsibility, then they are allowed to take onto themselves certain responsibility, and that means that they do jobs that they don't like. You know, one of my favorite phrases is sometimes you have to do stuff you don't like. That's why they call it work. I think work is delightful, but you know, there are people who are always trying to get by doing less. You need to create a culture where those people know that they can't do that within your team. How do we do this? Well, if you think about how you motivate people, and I highly encourage you to read Daniel Pink's book, Drive, if you haven't done so already. He comes down to the conclusion that employees want autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy means that they are allowed to be considered competent in their job. They're given work to do, and somebody isn't constantly looking over their shoulder. Good. That means if people are motivated by autonomy, they are motivated to be good at joint responsibility and not have to be forced into a situation where they are basically doing less than their share. So autonomy is the first element. Mastery is the second element. These people need to be trained. If you're going to let people assign tickets to themselves based on priority, they have to be competent to take on the tickets that they have. So you need a clear system of defining in the ticket, especially if you could do it in the description, that would be perfect, so that they don't have to open the ticket in order to determine whether or not they are competent to finish that ticket. Obviously, if you've got a service coordinator or a service manager who helps allot the tickets, that can go a long ways. But ultimately, a technician should be able to finish a job, put in their notes, close the ticket, and then grab the next ticket without constantly calling their manager to say, what's next, what's next, what's next. If you're constantly having to call the manager to find out what's next, you don't seem to have very much autonomy, and you really don't have joint responsibility, you have shared responsibility. So moving towards the joint responsibility, you need your folks to have autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So purpose means they got to know why their job exists, and they got to like the idea. They really want to say, hey, you know what? I'm part of a team that is awesome at what we do, and we provide spectacular tech support, and we hold each other accountable for what we do, and we have the same attitude towards work, towards tickets, towards clients, towards service. Now, how do you get all of that in a big bundle? Well, it's called culture. You have to build culture from the top down and basically build a team where you say, look, we put value in autonomy, mastery, and purpose. We want you to be out there basically managing yourself. We're going to put some guardrails around that, but we're also going to give you the training you need to do that. We're going to give you the support you need to do that. We're not going to second guess what you do. If you make a mistake, you are going to be the one who has to fix it. That's part of the responsibility. And we're going to make sure that we all as a team talk about it in those terms. We as a team are going to talk about responsibility. We're going to talk about service. We're going to talk about customers. We're going to talk about the culture that we have together. And that over time will gradually help you build a team where everyone is jointly responsible for great customer service. And I know there's some fine bits here where it may be a little difficult to figure out what's a shared responsibility versus a joint responsibility. But once you put attention on it, you'll begin to see that when there's always a legitimate reason for somebody to simply opt out of doing their job, that's shared responsibility. When everybody loves and wants to and enjoys sharing the work and doing their job, even the parts they don't like, then you have joint responsibility. You can and you should develop a culture of joint responsibility in your service delivery. Please put your comments and questions down below. I'll be very happy to talk to you about this. For Small Biz Thoughts, this is Carl Polachuk, wishing you the best of luck in everything you do.